Are you confused about the differences between mysteries for adults and mysteries for adolescents? We have good news for you today. I'm Fedora Amis, president of Greater St. Louis Sisters in Crime, and I'm interviewing our Vice President, Sarahlynn Lester. As a side note, I want to thank Sarahlynn for arranging our excellent program of Zoom meetings over the course of the year. Without her stellar help, I could never have embarked on this project to interview working members and discuss the subgenres of mystery. So far, we've tackled 8: classic, private eye, true crime, historical, suspense thriller, police procedural, amateur sleuth, and science fiction fantasy. Do we have too many categories? Too few? We'd love to hear your suggestions and comments. Send them to fedora@fedoraamis.com. Our goal is to bring clarity to readers, writers, booksellers, agents, and marketers of all kinds. The huge volume of books published each year grows at such an explosive rate that we need more specific words to locate our preferences and to describe them to others. Now, our series is finished, but for one thing, we want to shed light on YA, young adult mystery, middle school and children's mystery too, for that matter. I think readers and writers want to know how or whether authors make changes when they write for young readers and just what those changes might be. Well, here's a definition that I simplified from Writer's Edit online. Young adult mysteries have a protagonist between the ages of 15 and 19 who must solve a crime. The mysteries avoid graphic violence. The setting, themes, and subject matter explore priorities and worries which differ from the world of adults. So Sarahlynn can comment on that definition and blow it all to pieces. It'll be just fine. Sarahlynn lives in St. Louis, Missouri with her husband, their 3 children, and a joyously chaotic schedule. If you can't find her, she's hiding in a corner with a novel or stealthily planning their next family vacation. And you can always find her online at sarahlynlester.com. Well, Sarahlynn is vice president of the Greater St. Louis chapter of Sisters in Crime and an active member of Missouri Romance Writers of America. She writes both adult and young adult fiction. So, Sarahlynn, how does young adult differ from adult or children's or anything?
Well, first of all, Fedora, thank you for having me and for hosting this series. I think this was a really, really neat thing to do. It's been a lot of fun. The main difference between young adult fiction and adult fiction is the age of the protagonist, unsurprisingly, but that's not exclusively it. So a young adult novel has no adult lens. For example, with Stephen King's short story, The Body, which became the movie The Stand, that's not a young adult or even a middle grade, given the age of the character's story, because there's this shell of like an adult looking back and reminiscing. So the characters have more perspective than children would have in the moment. And that's the big difference between adult and young adult fiction. In young adult fiction, the protagonist is high school age. There is both upper and lower YA. And when you're writing upper YA, you can get away with a lot more graphic. You can do sex, you can do violence, you can have all kinds of stuff on the page. Kids are reading pretty much anything that adults are reading these days. And, just want to focus on the character needs to feel like they're of that age group and deal with issues that kids that age would be dealing with. And young adult includes all the genres of adult fiction. It's not really a genre in and of itself. Like there's young adult mystery, thriller, suspense, science fiction and fantasy, romance, historical, Western, all that. So it's a really fun area to write in.
I hear a lot about or read a lot about memes and tropes. Are there special memes and tropes that you use when you're doing YA?
I think for me, the most important thing is just to sound authentic. You never, ever, ever want to talk down to your readers in any genre, but especially in this one. Kids are savvy and they're smart. They're discerning readers. They don't want to be pandered to. They don't want to be taught a heavy-handed lesson. They just want a good story. So I would say that the most important thing is just to write a good story and write it well, and also spend time around actual kids. A lot of people are trying to, adults who are trying to write young adult fiction or remembering their own childhoods. Well, things have changed a lot. My kids have never brought home a textbook. They don't use them, even in high school, so they're just like so many things that have changed. And the way kids talk. I do have 3 kids of my own, 2 teens and a preteen. Um, I enjoy spending time with them and their friends when we are not in a pandemic. I volunteer at a school library, a couple of school libraries. I lead a youth kind of group. So I enjoy spending time around actual kids and listening to the way that they talk. And I think that that is part of, liking kids and spending time around them helps a lot with the authenticity of the voice.
So the language that you use must change then. How does it change? How would you say it does? I'm expecting you were thinking about the slang they might use. How about the level of language? How do you make that work for given children's or YA or any?
I don't change that at all. In fact, I lean into it. High schoolers, by and large, are reading more than most adults. They are required to read certain number of minutes a week for school, and they are reading the classics, and they are studying for the SAT. They have incredible vocabularies, better than a lot of adults that I hang around with every day. There are adults who like to read and have excellent vocabularies, but the majority of adults are not reading books at the rate that high school kids are. So I wouldn't adjust my vocabulary at all for talking to a high school kid.
Good point. I had no idea. But about finding the slang and that kind of thing, do you worry that it's going to get dated?
Yeah, and I think that depends on the sort of the genre of YA you're writing. If you're writing more literary YA, like you're looking towards winning awards and stuff like that, then you want to not drop. There is a thing in YA, kind of commercial YA, where there's a lot more name dropping than you get in a lot of adult novels. Brand names and artist names, like pop artists, pop singers, that kind of thing. And if you want the book to stand the test of time, you probably want to do a little less of that, a little less slang. Kids, can read books without slang too. But if you're going for something kind of funny, popular at the moment genre fiction in YA, then, have fun with it.
Do you need to be careful, do you think, about saying bad things about certain, fast food restaurants, for example? Will that get you into trouble down the line?
I imagine that's probably the same with, adult fiction as it is with kid lit. And I should mention here too that I think estimates say that more than 50% of readers of young adult literature are adults. After all, we were all once kids, and it's a big formative. The teen years are a formative time, and so there's a lot of opportunity for excellent stories of personal transformation and growth there. I would be careful about saying negative things about particular chains. But if you've got a character that feels strongly about something, then your character feels strongly about it. And I'm sure that, your publisher will let you know if it's a problem.
Yes, I'm sure they will. Well, how do you appeal to younger readers? You mentioned a couple of things like friendship, I think, that you mentioned just recently. And that's an important theme that goes through most of them. Are there others?
I really think that the diversity of young adult fiction is very similar to the diversity of adult fiction. And if you're just writing good stories and you're writing it well, and you can talk in a voice that sounds to a teen like it could be a teen, then I think that it's more about, entertaining and immersing in a story and hooking your reader and pulling them through. I don't think it's like any particular teen that's like, this is a teen thing. I mean, there's a lot of like a coming of age kind of thing is a pretty typical thing. But I think that that is something that we do throughout our lives. When we're teenagers, we feel like, okay, now I'm a grown up. And then we go to college and we're like, no, now I'm a grown up. And then you get your first job. And, like I look back now at the things I was saying and doing in my mid 20s and I cringe. I was not grown up. I'll probably feel the same way in 10 years about me today. So I just think of, I guess I think less of the young adult aspect of it and more of just like the humanity of it.
Well, in bookstores and libraries, all the young adult fiction is pushed together, as you had suggested earlier. How do you attract those teens who are more interested in mystery? How do you find your readers?
That is a really good question. I tend to write in fairly niche areas, I guess, which should help with that part a little bit. For example, the novel that my agent is shopping around publishers right now has a main character with an intellectual disability. And there aren't a whole lot of novels that have that. So, when the field isn't huge, your book can stand out a little bit more easily. My current work in progress is in the vein of Karen McManus's One of Us is Lying, which, I mean, like, YA suspense is and thrillers are just like, they are just so immediate and so intense when you've got, because you always want to kind of raise the risk and the danger. And when you've got a younger protagonist, it's already automatically kind of dialed up. So, being included in a similar books, or if you like this, you might also like, writing in a style of somebody who's established and popular can, if it's not a crowded field, work to a newer author's advantage.
Can you reach out directly to certain groups or organizations if you have, for example, a particular kind of challenged protagonist?
Sure. And I think, well, this interview is for Sisters in Crime, which is an organization that was founded on having authors helping each other and supporting each other. And I very much believe in a rising tide, raises all ships sort of approach to my career, and the careers of other people that are in my writing groups and critique groups. The Society of Children's Book Authors and Writers and Illustrators is very helpful as well and very supportive. There's a lot of good connections through there. And I'm sure that there are other organizations, like you mentioned, with disability issues or any kind of special issue that your particular book might be about, where you could reach out and go through something like that. But I see more book promotion from other authors than anywhere else. I think a lot of authors, there's a really supportive community. It doesn't seem to me to be by and large competitive, and it is more collaborative, which I appreciate.
There are a lot of publishers out there, and there are a lot of writers out there, and let's hope we can all find our place in the world.
I hope so.
That's what we're all looking for, isn't it?
Mhm.
Well, I wonder how you got to want to become a writer in the first place. How did that come about?
Oh, that's a very good question. I suppose I sort of always knew. I still have a copy of the first book that I ever wrote myself. When I was little, I would tell my mom the stories and she would write them down, and I would cut pages out of the Sears and Roebuck catalog to illustrate them. But the first book I wrote myself was in first grade. I wrote it myself. I illustrated it. I read the audio book into my cassette recorder. So I think it's always been there. And for a long, long time, I thought I was going to do other things. I went to school for, I was pre-med. I studied lots and lots and lots of math and sciences, which I enjoyed. And I kept all of my textbooks. My thinking was, I still have them in my basement. My thinking was always, I need to keep these for when I start writing biomedical thrillers. I need to have the references. And it was when I realized that what I really wanted to do was write books and tell stories. I didn't want to practice medicine for the sake of practicing medicine. I wanted it for the people and the stories and the characters that I realized I probably should not go on to medical school.
Well, I mean, it's certainly your decision, and a very interesting one after devoting so much time to the sciences to discover you're really a right-brained person, huh?
I love math, I love science, but I'm a reader and a writer first. So.
Terrific. Well, what's your day like? I know you have 3 children and a very busy household, especially with the pandemic going on. How do you manage?
Yes, everybody has been home for so a year and 4 months or whatever it is at this point. My kids will be going back to school in the fall, which they are very excited about. 2 of them have been able to be vaccinated, which is exciting. So at this point, they are relatively independent. They are older. I just really feel for the parents of little bitty kids during this pandemic. I cannot imagine what they're going through. I did a lot of supportive work during the school year. But now that it's summer, I'm actually a full-time MFA student in addition to my writing and my parenting and all the other stuff that I do, which is a lot. But I have meetings about 5 times a week with writers groups and critique groups. And sometimes my groups just get together and we sit down and we write, and then we stop and we debrief, and then we write some more. And sometimes we trade and critique work. So there's just, my days involve hours of reading and writing. It's in order, I believe, to write well, you have to read well. And so I read widely. I read outside my comfort zone. I read outside my genre. And I read a lot.
Well, some of those authors and some of those experiences must be shaping what you are writing today. What are some of your favorite authors and ones that you'd point to that you like other people to read?
Oh, wow. So that is a question I did not at all prepare for. Seems like an obvious one, but I didn't. One of the book that I read that made me first think, I want to write a book with a teen main character was Stephanie Perkins' Anna and the French Kiss. I just fell in love with the world and the stories and the writing. And I just thought, but what if you could tell that story, but with a smaller world, with different stakes, with a character with disabilities? And that's where my idea for Opposite of Down came from. The first book I ever wrote about with a teen main character. And I, as far as, well, we're talking mainly about crime writing. So for YA mysteries and thrillers, I really enjoy Karen McManus, E. Lockhart, Holly Jackson. There's so many good writers in the space. John Green. I really enjoy all of those, and I think if you want to read writers who are doing young adult mysteries and thrillers well, I think those are some of the good ones.
Most excellent. Well, let's talk about the book that you just mentioned. That was your first one out, and you have another one that you're working on or have just stopped. What's going on with you right now?
My agent started shopping around Opposite of Down, and the feedback I was getting was really good, but I think that there is something that I could do that would improve the pacing in the second half. And so I pulled it back because I wanted to take another pass through it. And that's what I'm working on now. I should be done with that in the next 2 weeks. Which is just an overwhelming project when you think your work is fairly done, and then you realize, no, I'm going to do some major stuff to it. And I'm in the middle of that, which is always kind of a distracting place to be because my head is full. I feel like when I'm revising, I have to hold the entire novel in my head so I don't get repetitive when I'm, adding and moving stuff. And then that will go back out this fall, hopefully, to publishers. I've already written the sequel to that one that will just sit in a drawer, possibly forever, until we find out what happens with the first one. And then, of course, I'm writing a new one because I'm always writing a new one. And the new one I'm writing is, I think it will also be YA, and it's a thriller and a lot of fun.
Does it have a title yet?
It does. It's called You'll Be Sorry. And it's a mixture of first-person narrative and a lot of epistolary pieces, which is unlike anything I've written before, and a heck of a lot of fun because there's such a wide variety of sources you can use. There are texts, there are emails, there's Reddit, there's hidden cameras, and just all kinds of different ways that teens communicate with one another. And I'm having a blast writing an epistolary novel.
Well, that sounds cool. Could it be a graphic novel?
Definitely not. That is a whole different genre. And I do have a friend. So one of my daughters is like obsessed with a particular series of fantasy novels, and her and a friend of mine actually is the author who adapts the novels into graphic novels. And then there's a third person who's a graphic novel author, a well-known one, who does the art for those. So it's actually a 3-person collaborative team where they all work together and work very seriously. But writing a novel is a completely different skill set for being able to tell the novel in like panels, like just how do you capture the entirety of a novel in just the little like dialogue blurbs, and then the art. So those are 3 different parts, and I don't feel qualified to even think about doing either of those latter 2, the art or the adaptation part.
What do you think makes the characters that you create appealing to the age of readers that you're trying to reach?
Perhaps I'm very immature. I think it's because I really enjoy hanging around with kids, and I do it a lot. And I don't um, prefer, adults to kids. I find kids just interesting and fascinating and fun. And so I think that probably part of it is all of my stories start with character first. I build the person and then the plot. So I think possibly it's the fact that I clearly respect my readers that makes them enjoy the characters that I make, I hope.
So that speaks a bit to your method of writing. Since you're saying that plot is secondary and you start with characters, does that mean that you're a pantser? That is, you just go out and you start writing and that's page one and you go from there instead of outlining as many do?
Yeah, I've tried a lot of different ways to find out what works for me. And, there are the big camps. I'm a plotter. I'm a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. I'm somewhere in between. The first book my first novel that I completed was a mystery, a cozy mystery. And I attempted to write it like as a pantser, and I solved the entire mystery in 16,000 words, which is somewhere between a long short story and a novella. I mean, it's nowhere near a full novel. So then I had to rewrite it from scratch using an outline to kind of hit the milestones at the right part, so that it would all come together in the right length. And so I have to be somewhere in between. If I know too much about what's happening, then it's boring and I don't want to write it. And if I don't know enough, then I can't handle the pacing and hit the beats in the right spots. So what I often do is a character will come to me and I just free write to just lock that voice down. And once I know the voice, then I start thinking about the plot and I try to think about what are the big points, like what are the turning points, what are the three acts, and try to think of, okay, these are the pivotal moments that are coming and I want to hit them at about this like I want to hit this point at about 20,000 words. I want to hit this point at about 60,000 words, that kind of thing. So then, and then as I go, I can, I just sort of take, I like to give myself kind of like writing prompt so that like I don't have to face an empty page the next day. So I'll just like write, and then they argue or something. And then like, so I sit down the next day and I'm like, oh, I'm writing an argument. And then when I'm finished writing, I would write something for my next one that will be like, and then they go somewhere fun together. It's like open-ended. So when I sit down to write, it's still a process of discovery, but it's all working toward the end that I have planned.
So it is linear. You don't hop around and write scenes from the end somewhere near the beginning. So it's linear that you work, but just a little bite at a time.
Yeah, that is a good description of my process. I don't do a good job with writing non-linearly because I so much about the character arc. And how could I know a lot of authors do this and they do it very well. I can't. Just like I know where my character is and I can take them a step further and a step further, but how do I write them over here? Like at this point, I don't know exactly what they'll sound like yet because I have to go on that journey with the character to figure out how they've grown to get to that point.
Well, we have only a little time left, and I think I might ask you if you have any advice for those who want to write young adult mystery.
Oh, well, I would say definitely the first thing is read. Obviously, read a lot, read widely, read diversely, read well. And I recommend also immersing yourself in author culture, whether that's joining local writers groups, attending conferences, taking classes online. I mentioned earlier that I am in an MFA program. I wrote probably 8 draft manuscripts, most of which were not any good. And I had an agent before I even thought about, well, not before I thought about, before I started my MFA program. I don't think that is required. I think that what is required is that you write. And I think that's where a lot of authors might fall short, like I want to write, but how do I write? So find some way to give yourself the deadlines and the accountability that you need to just get the words on the page. When I'm writing something, every time I have to tell myself it's brilliant, it's perfect, it's going to be amazing in order to get through an entire novel. It's hard to sustain that energy to create an entire novel. And then later I can look at it and say, well, maybe not, but this one's better than the one before. Although I don't think that's necessarily helpful advice for a new writer to think you might have to write several books before you get good. Some people knock it out of the ballpark with the first novel. Some people are quicker studies than me.
But mostly I think it's about, persistence and keeping yourself together and getting better and better each time. So I certainly agree with you about all of that. Well, I know I have enjoyed today and hope you have as well. We are now finished with our series, which you can all find on YouTube.